Most of the images you are about to see are between 400 and 500 years old. Many were drawn by artists who were there, who witnessed and recorded these historical truths.
An ancient Maya prophecy says that the American Indian people will undergo 500 years of suffering. Then the eagle of the north and the condor of the south will finally come together and join their tears. And when they do, the Indian nations will be reborn.
Many Indian elders say that the 500 years are 1492 to 1992, that the cycle is now coming to a close and the Indian nations are about to be reborn.
The Caribbean islands were once the homeland of the Taino Indian people. They were a prosperous, friendly nation, numbering in the millions. Taino means peaceful or good.
They lived in villages of round palm-thatched huts called canays. The men hunted with trained little barkless dogs. Their main weapons were fishbone-tipped spears, and they used pet parrots to decoy wild ones, then noose their feet. They fished the sea and dug out canoes, some large enough to carry 80 or more. The Tainos were great swimmers. Their bread was cassava, baked on a stone griddle. They kept a pepper pot soup simmering at all times. They shaped clay coils into pots, wove baskets from biheo leaves. They mixed earth and ashes into mounds where they grew cassava. On hillsides, they planted corn, 5 kernels in each hole a pace apart. They grew yams, beans, pepper, coconut, papayas, pineapple.
They bathed daily using deagle root as soap. They slept in net hammocks. To lock a house, they placed a stick across the entrance, and no Taino would think to pass. They wore ornaments of gold, shell, and bone, and almost no clothes. At the hub of each village was a plaza, a ceremonial center with a temple, a court where they played a ceremonial ball game, and the bojillo, home of the cacique or chief and his or her extended family. The cacique could be either man or woman, such as the powerful and wise Ganabo and Anacaona. The cacique's job was the village welfare, assigning the daily work routine and making sure everyone got a fair share. Their only rivals were the Caribes, who lived on faraway islands and raided occasionally in search of women.
Then one day, 3 huge ships appeared offshore with strange people on board. Many said this was Guamikina, the culture giver, returned. Ages ago, Guamikina had come down from the sky in a great ship and taught the people the Taino way of life. When he was through, he returned to the sky, but said he would come back someday.
So, many thought these new strangers were Guamikina and his people and went to greet them with precious gifts. But at the very first island the ships touched, called Guanahani, the strangers kidnapped 6 Tainos and took them away. The ships continued on to other larger islands, but off the shore of Haiti, one of their ships hit a reef, fell on its side, and split apart. The Tainos rescued the strangers. The year was 1492. The ship was the Santa Maria, and Guamikina was Christopher Columbus. Columbus was lost and thought he was near India. So he called the Tainos Indians. He was looking for China and carried a letter from the King and Queen of Spain to the Emperor Kublai Khan. He traded the Tainos little bells and mirrors for their gold ornaments. The Tainos treated the strangers like honored guests. They built Columbus a village and fed his entire crew for weeks. And finally, Columbus sailed back to Spain, leaving 39 men behind.
10 months later, he returned at the head of an armada of 17 ships, 1,500 soldiers, horses, and cannon. He returned with his army because Columbus was just not an explorer. He came in search of gold and power, not just to discover the Indies, but to conquer them. Columbus was the first military leader of the European invasion of the Western Hemisphere. He had cut the deal with the King and Queen of Spain that he would become governor of all lands he could conquer, and they would share all the gold, silver, pearls, gems, and spices he could grab.
The land route from Europe to the wealth of Asia had been cut off by the Islamic nations. So the expanding European powers searched for a new route. The Portuguese began sailing south around Africa, attacking African nations along the way and monopolizing that route. So Spain turned to Columbus's proposal of crossing the ocean to reach Asia. Columbus found islands just where he expected them, but he thought he was in the China Sea when he was really in the Caribbean.
The Western Hemisphere was fully populated by about 100 million Indian people. The northern nations had highly developed social system, stressing harmony and balance with the earth. Central Mexico was a network of stone city-states, home to the Mexica nations, inheritors of the great civilization of Teotihuacan. The Mayas of Yucatan and Guatemala had a fully written language. Their astronomy and mathematics were in many ways superior to Europe's. The Incas organized the Andean peoples into a system that provided for all their every material needs. The rainforest peoples, like the northern nations, stressed a way of life of harmony and balance.
When Columbus returned to the site of his colony on Haiti, he found it burned to the ground. The Spaniards had abused the Taino people, forcing them to be servants, molesting the women until the most powerful cacique on the island, Caonabo, came down from his home in the golden mountains of Cibao and killed them all. Columbus sent a messenger to Caonabo offering to make peace. Caonabo accepted, but Columbus seized him and put him in chains. Then Columbus sent the army to attack. The Tainos resisted, but their fishbone spears were no match for guns, cannons, swords, armor, horses, and vicious dogs. Columbus led the first Indian massacre. And when the Tainos were finally defeated, Columbus demanded that all Tainos become Christians and that each Taino in Cibao pay him a bellful of gold every 3 months. The penalty for not paying was amputation of the hands.
The gold the Tainos possessed had been collected over many generations, and within a season, Columbus had it all. And the only way the Tainos could fill their quotas was to dig it from the river banks. And soon the streams were filled with whole families desperately trying to find enough in time. They began to flee to the highest mountains and remotest spots, leaving their crops unplanted, and famine stalked the land. But now, the Christians came after them. When the Tainos caught a Spaniard now, they melted gold and poured it down his throat. But Columbus still couldn't get enough gold. So he sent shiploads of Tainos to Spain to be sold at the slave markets.
Word of Columbus's invasion spread quickly, and now, wherever Spanish ships approached, the Indians no longer met them with gifts, but with arrows.
Columbus's men captured the Taino leaders and killed them. Kaonabo, his wife, the beautiful and wise Anakaona, Hatui, Behechio, Guarionesh. Soon the Caribbean fell to the Spaniards, and the entire Taino nation were made slaves, as well as their neighbors, the Caribs.
Millions died as slaves on the plantations and the mines, of exhaustion, disease, and hunger. Those hiding in the mountains saw that all was lost, and thousands jumped from cliffs, hanged or stabbed themselves, or drank cassava poison. And so the island of Haiti, a land thriving with millions of people when Columbus arrived, within a short time was almost depopulated. But Governor Columbus abused the Spanish colonists just as he had abused the Indians. So the king disposed him and sent him home in chains. Columbus's actions caused the deaths of over 2 million Indian people. He began the European slave trade in the Western Hemisphere. He cast the mold for the genocide of the American Indians.
Even with him gone, the mold had been cast. The conquest and slaughter raged on. Haiti, Cuba, Puerto Rico, Jamaica, the Antilles, the Bahamas, millions of Taino Arawaks dead, the entire nation murdered. But even then, the slaughter in the mines and plantations continued with new victims, Caribs, Aztecs, and Mayas from the mainland, and slaves from Africa. Over 50 million Africans died in chains on European slave ships from Africa to the Western Hemisphere.
When a Spaniard was granted land, he was also granted all the Indians living on that land as serfs. This was the encomienda system used to subdue all Spanish America. The invasion continued with new leaders and reached the mainland. The first nation they met were the Mayas, who were more culturally advanced in many ways than the Europeans, with a written language and superior astronomy. The Mayas lived in city-states throughout the peninsula of Yucatan. Even though the Mayas had little gold, in 1517 the Spaniards attacked. The Mayas drove them out, mortally wounding the Spanish leader. But new battalions of invaders returned. The Mayas fought valiantly for 19 years, and some Maya groups were never defeated.
Meanwhile, the Spaniards turned to Central Mexico, home to the Nahua nations. The Nahuas, like the Mayans, lived in numerous city-states throughout, as they called it, Anahuac. At the time of the Spanish invasion, the Nahua nations known as Mexicas or Aztecs dominated most of Anahuac. The Mexicas offered the Spaniards gifts and asked them not to land. But the gifts only made Cortés hungrier for gold and power. He led his army towards the capital, Tenochtitlan, attacking and defeating other Nahua cities on the way. Cortés forced the defeated Nahua cities to join him against the Aztecs. The Aztecs received him as honored guest, but he seized Moctezuma and held him hostage. The Mexicas fought bravely, led by Cuauhtémoc, and drove the invaders out of Tenochtitlan. But the Spaniards returned with ships and cannons. Weakened by European diseases, the Aztecs were finally defeated. Cuauhtémoc was tortured, then murdered. But even in military defeat, the Mexica people learned to survive.
The invasion moved south into the Mayan highlands. In Chiapas and Guatemala, they attacked the Chamulas, Quiches, and Cachiquel Mayas. The invaders soon reached the Inca land of Peru, or Tawantinsuyu. The diseases of the Europeans arrived even before they did and ravaged the population. The Inca Atahualpa welcomed the Spaniards, but they suddenly attacked. The Inca armies resisted, but were devastated by epidemic diseases. Pizarro held Atahualpa hostage for a ransom of a room full of gold, which the Incas paid. Nonetheless, the Spaniards murdered Atahualpa and later Manco Capec. Tens of thousands of Indians died in battle, and the survivors suffered defeat and slavery. Nonetheless, the Andean Indian people remained in constant rebellion against their oppressors.
Other Europeans followed the trail of Columbus and the Spaniards in search of gold, gems, furs, land, and other riches. The French, Portuguese, the Dutch at the tip of South America, the English in the Arctic, Florida, Pennsylvania, Virginia, Dakota, California.
Everywhere the invaders attacked, the Indians were there to resist them.
Despite 5 centuries of genocide, with over 50 million deaths, the Indian people have never ceased resisting and have survived, holding fast to traditions, culture, and land as much as possible.
Many elders say that the year 1992 completes the 500-year cycle of Indian suffering, 1492 to 1992, predicted by ancient prophecy.
Many elders say that the cycle is now at its close, that the eagle of the north and the condor of the south are finally coming together to join their tears, and as they do, the Indian nations are being reborn.